Thanks, Cian Corla. And thanks a lot to Sinn Féin for bringing forward this motion. I think the starting point for a discussion about childcare in this country is acknowledging that the system that we have is thoroughly broken, really, really broken from almost every point of view. Broken from the point of view of parents who are struggling, scrambling, to try and find a place for their children, and then trying to afford another mortgage effectively to get their children the care that they need. A crisis for women in particular, who in many circumstances the burden of caring if they can't find or can't afford falls on, restricting their ability to go back to work in many cases. A crisis for children who aren't getting the care that they need and deserve. A crisis for small providers who find themselves squeezed in a very difficult situation, and a crisis for workers who are doing, just vital work, absolutely essential work that sets people up for life, and are paid poverty wages in very, very many cases, a majority of cases, much, much less than they deserve for the vital work that they're doing. And so it's a system that's broken, that causes crisis for so many people, and the only winners out of the current system are the big, big providers. Happy to get the state money, happy to charge parents huge amount of money, and are therefore happy to pay out small amounts in terms of wages, and are happy then to pocket very significant profits. And at its base, the problem comes down to the whole model of the childcare sector, which is a reliance on private, for-profit operation, then with the mix of state money being given in to actually fund the majority of the income that the childcare sector gets. It's up to almost 60% at this stage, with just over 40% coming from parental fees. That went even higher in the course of the pandemic, with the private childcare providers being bailed out with large amounts of public money. It was necessary to keep the whole thing going. But that's the root problem, is the for-profit model of childcare, which then the state tries to paper over the cracks with public money, as opposed to saying, no, we need a fundamentally different model of childcare, which is about public provision for free of quality childcare as part of a national childcare service, which absolutely could be done. And at root, that's what we're going to come back to again and again and again, in terms of resolving or fixing the broken system and building a very different type of system which prioritises the children, the parents, the workers, and so on. I want to just read a bit of an email I got from a constituent, which I think it's very typical of the experience that people have, and of the many stories that I hear just from friends and so on, who are just struggling to get childcare and struggling to be able to afford it. It's a woman who lives in Hunters Wood in Furhouse, and who's highlighting there's no childcare local to me, but also she's aware there's a serious lack of childcare in Dublin as a whole. And she says, I cannot return to work until I can find a place. I'm on the list for the 5 local creches in my area since I was 3 months pregnant back in October 2020. When parents ring creches asking if there's any update, all they're told is that their child is on their list. When I pushed asking what the chances of a place are at some stage this year, they all said that there is 0 chance of a place in 2022. One of the creches has informed me all along that my daughter is next on their list. When I asked them why they cannot promise me a place come September, due to kids naturally leaving and starting school, they explained something to me that they should have explained back in October 2020. My daughter is not next on their list like they've confirmed all along. She is next on a cancellation list in order to move on to their actual waiting list. It's a complete mess. I'm aware that I live in an area whose population is nearly full of young families, hence the demand of childcare. Why are local TDs, government departments ignoring this issue? There seems to be no correlation between establishing creches in areas highly populated with young families. I'm aware my scenario is no different than thousands of parents in Dublin. So there you see, and she goes on to make a point later on about the colossal cost of childcare, but she's not even at the point of being able to pay a colossal cost because you can't get access. And again, it comes down to an absence of planning and this reliance on a for-profit market. Look at the colossal cost, because I think there's a discussion in society which is good about the cost of living crisis. A huge part of the cost of living crisis for families with young children is the cost of childcare. If we had free, publicly provided childcare, well, actually, that would have a big impact on how people are experiencing the cost of living crisis. And I do think it's vital we put forward that, like, free public provision of public goods as part of the answer to the cost of living crisis. We have the third most expensive childcare in Europe, with parents paying an average of €800 a month. And you hear many stories of people paying more than that. And most of those parents, I think, these days will be aware that they are the workers who are minding their children are some of the lowest paid in Europe, with 60% on less than a living wage, and many lacking basic workers' rights like sick pay. And again, it comes back to the point that Ireland has the greatest reliance on private, for-profit childcare in the OECD. And the large chains are increasing their grip on the so-called market of childcare, and are squeezing large profits out of parents and of staff. Instead, we need a national childcare service, free at the point of use, publicly provided, and a public education system. There are also important issues with the government's new core funding proposals for the sector. Certainly the small providers are telling us that the new approach is heavily skewed in favour of the large chains, who will pocket the lion's share of the funding, while the smaller operators will see very little, if any, of it. These are massive chains making millions in profits every year, and the government policy is essentially lining their pockets, while many smaller providers are in trouble. They're also very worried that they won't be able to meet the government's April 22nd deadline for applying, because they haven't heard back yet from the Minister about important questions that they've asked, and they don't know if they'll hear back before the deadline. To return to the issue about childcare workers, it's good. The issue of childcare has been put on the agenda because of parents, but also because of workers getting organised, campaigning, getting on the streets together with small providers. And because of childcare workers getting organised, they have put pressure on the state, fighting for an ERO to raise their wages to a living wage. But again, their perception is that the state is dragging its heels on this. The Joint Labour Committee to look into wages in the sector was established over 9 months ago, but the workers are still left waiting. A recent survey showed that 41% of childcare workers are actively looking for a job in another sector, with low pay being the single biggest issue causing that. The government must not delay any longer. We need an ERO to raise the wages for workers in this sector to a living wage. I think really we should be saying that the minimum wage that people should be having in this sector for this vital, life-shaping work that people are doing is €15 an hour. Final point I'll make is just this fundamental point about how childcare has been left to the market. That's why we're in the situation that we're in. That's why we have all the crises that we are in. If we want to see early years education as an integral part of education, then it's not just some sort of add-on that happens before school happens. It's part of education and should be publicly provided as part of the education system. So just as we made primary education free, just as we made secondary education free, just as in theory we made third level education free, we need to make childcare services, childcare provision free, bring them into the public system, guarantee workers decent wages, and it's for the best of all of society. We need a fundamentally remodelled system and a national childcare system as a crucial part of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Murphy.